says connecting. Hey, RaShun, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. How about yourself?
I'm good. So we live, y'all. We live
That's it. That's it. We're here.
here, so we can go ahead and get started since Instagram is very strict about this hour time limit.
Yeah.
So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I'll just go ahead and introduce myself. So for those who may not know, my name is Danielle Beal. I am a certified life coach, a qualified mental health professional trainee, also a licensed minister and the founder of Melanin Mental Health and Ministry. And so what I do with Melanin Mental Health and Ministry, I empower Black women and clergy to be intentional about self-care to improve mental health. And so our topic today is mental health and mental illness and relationships. And so my special guest is RaShun, and I'll allow him to introduce himself. So let us know who you are, where you're from, and what you do.
Okay. Well, my name is RaShun Cowan. I'm from Mobile, Alabama. Currently, me and my family, we live in Houston, Texas. Okay. H-Town, hold it down.
Right.
I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I am also a certified clinical trauma professional. I'm a Christian. I am a father. I am a husband. Well, I'm actually about to be a two-time father, so that's good.
Congratulations.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, thank you so much for joining me tonight. And so
Yeah.
again, everyone, is mental illness and relationships. And when we talk about relationships, we're not just relating to romantic relationships. So we're talking about all the dynamics of interpersonal relationships. So that may be spiritual, friendships, acquaintance, so many different relationships that we are a part of in our day-to-day life.
Yeah.
And so, RaShun, your business is Faith Talk Counseling. And so I love the definition on your website. And so you said not only is it based on beliefs, but belief in yourself. So not necessarily just a higher power, but belief in yourself. And so can you tell us how you pretty much came up with that, and how do you operate and practice with faith?
Yeah. Well, thank you. My faith in God is one of the biggest things that drives me. It drives what I do. It drives my decision making. And so God is a big part of my life. But, as I've moved through life, I've also realized that I've needed to have some faith in myself, right? Even before this meeting, you and I meet, and I have to build up that faith and that courage and that confidence in myself. And you have to do that every day. And sometimes we get to a place of anxiety and a place of depression when we don't practice, exercising faith in ourselves and boosting and building up our self-esteem. And so I found it so beneficial for me to believe and trust in God, and also believe and trust in myself to do a lot of the different things that we do every day.
That's powerful. See, believe and trust in yourself as well.
Yes.
So that's a perfect segue. As you mentioned, anxiety and depression. And so many people may wrestle with anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder. And so some people may not know that their friends or family or whomever are struggling. And so what are some symptoms of anxiety or depression, whichever one you like to highlight, or if you like to speak to all of them? How can we identify, when a friend of ours is struggling or a family member?
Sometimes it's important to make sure that we can get out of ourselves. Sometimes in relationships, we're so focused on them helping us rather than how we can help. And having a servant spirit is one of the things that helps us to be able to, identify when something's going wrong in other people, when there's a need that we need to serve in other people. And so when we have family members or friends that are struggling with depression, once we see them starting to pull away from us, or once we start to hear, as we actively listen to them, start to hear their conversation go another way that's not encouraging, that's not building them up, or moving the needle forward in their life. Once we start to see and hear those things, then, it's beneficial for us to be proactive in that.
And you said something so major, actively listening. Because so
Yes.
many people listen to respond, and they're not really listening, or they're listening so they like, wait, all right, now it's my turn. Let me tell you
Yeah.
about yourself.
They're listening
So
to
what
react.
exactly? So what exactly is active listening?
Yeah. So active listening is when you take the time to actually listen to somebody and hear what they're saying and be able to repeat it back to them. So often, when I'm actively listening to somebody, they'll, tell me about their day. And I would repeat back to them, well, it sounds like you had this type of day. Well, it sounds like these were the things that you were struggling with. Does that sound about right? That way they know I'm listening and I'm here and I'm present in this moment with them. And because that's so important. I can't tell you, there's so many people that we interact with sometimes where we have this conversation with them. And then the first thing they will do will be to immediately go to something that they're dealing with, or to say, oh, I'm dealing with this problem. And so, it doesn't help us when people change the conversation towards them rather than helping us through our own issues as well. And that's why we talk about having that servant spirit. When you see somebody, you hear somebody going through something, and you're actively listening to them and you hear that problem, then you can best help them in that way.
That's good. And also the fact that you are a certified trauma specialist as well, clinical certified trauma specialist. I think I got it right. Professional, I probably would jack it up,
yes.
But you're a certified trauma specialist. And so
yes.
The thing about trauma is that, I was doing some research over the past few weeks.
I saw that.
And I'm like, okay, wow. So a lot of times we don't realize how that initial relationship with our parents or guardians has shaped our lives. And so I was just thinking about that. I'm like, okay, wow. So trauma, so how people act in their relationships may be a direct result of how they may have been raised or brought up, or the different things that they experience. And also something else, that each person that develops a mental illness, it may not be a result of trauma, and each person that experiences trauma may not develop mental illness. And so just speaking to that idea, so what exactly does trauma look like in us, in African Americans?
Yeah, whoa. Yeah, that's a good question there, right? So for us as African Americans, we have to really look deep because there's so many different beliefs and so many different ideals that we pass down generations, to be able to say, okay, well, this person, you have to be strong for this, you have to be strong to do that. We're a very strong people. We can overcome, but to what extent? We have to put so many things on the back burner. Our feelings, we have to put on the back burner, especially when we get into a conversation about, men and masculinity and what it means, and not crying, not showing any emotion. That in itself sparks trauma for us because we don't have an outlet to use, right? Depression is one of the things that we have a big issue with in our community, but we don't talk about it enough because we keep pushing. We keep pushing and we put it on the back burner. Well, I'll deal with that later. Well, I don't have time for that right now. The generations before us, that's what they said, right? I don't have time to get in my feelings. I don't have time to talk about this and that, because I got to work. I got to make money. I got to put food on the table. But at the same time, you're also abusing your wife, or at the same time, you're also neglecting your kids, and you're doing these toxic behaviors that are affecting your family in a negative way. And you're not being vigilant. You're not actively listening to your spouse. You're creating this toxic thing because of this push that we have to constantly do to be good, to just make it, to just get by, right? I was listening to something a few months ago, about us as Black people just having that need to survive here in America. It's hard for us to even make it because our first job is just to survive, just to get to the next stage. Well, I would do this. Well, I could do all of that if I wasn't, so bent on needing to put food on the table. We have all these issues because we haven't had a lot of opportunity to just be in a place to where we can deal with ourselves. And I appreciate this generation and where we are right now because we're taking more time to do that. We're taking more time to go to therapy, to go to counseling, to find self-help books, to find people that we need in our lives to help support us. And we're taking moments to set better boundaries for ourselves. And that's so important, right? So when we're talking about trauma in relationships and trauma in our family, we have fathers that aren't there and how that traumatizes, the little boys and the little girls that are raised today. We have the neglect and the domestic violence and all of the abuse that we experience, and just everybody in general. When we talk about different things, when we see somebody getting killed in the street, it doesn't always have to be direct trauma. Sometimes it could be indirect trauma. Even just being able to see it every time we open Facebook and we see it and we see
Exactly.
somebody being murdered right there, that indirect trauma that we feel in that moment, that sadness, that depression, that, lowness that we feel of, hopelessness, that we're still here after all of these years, and trying to make it and trying to just survive, right? That in itself is some trauma that we deal with as people.
Absolutely. And the fact that you said just on survival, period. And I think so many people may miss that. And so we normalize so many behaviors in our community because that's just the way they are, or this is how we are, or this is
Yeah.
always how it's going to be. And so it
Mm-hmm.
can be very toxic. So many of us struggle to identify what toxic is because,
Mm-hmm.
again, we've normalized. We think these behaviors are normal. This is all that we have witnessed. And so many people, even as to speak to the romantic aspect of relationships, how so many Black women think that they have to suffer to receive love. And it's like, no, suffering is not a prerequisite for love. And, so it's like, how do we begin to shift this narrative? And so, as you mentioned, a lot of us are beginning to do the work. But what about those who are still, they're not convinced and they're in this cycle of, I don't trust people, I don't need nobody.
Yeah.
I've learned that you can't trust nobody. And so what would you say to that person? Or how do we reach that person that's like, no, I can't trust nobody? And they
Yeah.
don't realize that lack of trust goes back to their home. Who
Yeah.
told you, who says you can't trust people, or who were you not able to trust? And so how do we identify, that
Mm-hmm.
in ourselves?
So I want to answer that question in two parts. So
Okay.
first, and going back to relationships and accepting things that we shouldn't accept, a lot of that is some of that belief that was passed down generational. Well, you have to deal with it right now because he's making the money and you need to be with somebody that has money. So you need to deal with it and put up with it, right? And other
Right.
different ideals and beliefs like that where we just deal with stuff, instead of actively putting up boundaries and saying, you know what, I'm better than that and I don't need that in my life because that's toxic. And so now we're getting to a space where we could do that. But to answer your question, one of the things that, let me see, one of the things that I want to be able to say, give me 1 second.
Oh, no problem.
So go back to that question one more time because I
Okay, look.
had a
I'm
brain.
like, wait, let me, because look, I was
Right.
in the moment, so let me figure out exactly what the question was, or I'll try to reframe it. So for those in our community, in the Black community, who may have this notion of, I don't trust anybody,
Oh, yeah. Okay.
people can't be trusted, how do
Yeah.
we reach those people, or how do people who say those things get to a place
Yeah.
of recognizing the root cause of it? Like, where does this stem from?
Yeah.
Why do I believe that I can't trust anyone? Was it those
Yeah.
parents and guardians that, provided a lack of trust or lack
Yeah.
of comfort, which shaped my
Yeah.
belief?
So one, I would say because we count our failures. And so we count and we measure people up against perfection, right? We stop looking at people as being human beings. And once they mess up one time, then we automatically say, oh, I can't trust them. Two, we hear other people say it. We hear society say it. We hear our parents, grandparents say it. You can't trust this person. You can't trust anybody. All you can trust is yourself, right? But God didn't put us on this place to be alone, to work alone, to live alone, and to love alone, right? He didn't
Yeah.
make us to do that. So we were meant to work together. And so one thing that we have to work to do is to accept that sometimes we're going to mess up. Sometimes we are going to not fulfill each other's promises. But it's important to understand who you're dealing with and believe who they are when they say that they're doing something or when they say that they're not, right?
Mm-hmm.
Look at somebody and being able to say, okay, this person has a history of not doing things in the way that I need it to be done. So let me not continue to put my faith in that, rather look elsewhere, because we can do a little bit, but together we could do a whole lot. And so we have
Right.
to make sure that we lean on people sometimes And right, sometimes we will be disappointed, but at the same time, we also disappoint. And we have to make sure that we acknowledge that because we're all human. But if we try to live this world alone, we're going to deal with a lot of anxiety. We're going to deal with a lot of depression, a lot of anger issues, just
Yes.
angry because we don't have the help. So you can say all day long, man, I'm doing this by myself. But at the same time, you're saying that with a grudge. You're saying that with, oh, my goodness, you know, if I had help, you know, I could do this, but I can't trust anybody. I can't do all these different things, you know. But sometimes we just have to put that pride and that ego aside and just ask. Ask somebody that we can trust. Build a system of people that you can trust and lean on, you know, rather than just canceling everybody out. You know, we have maybe 5 people that we talk to, and we don't continue to try to add new friends to that, you know, T-Mobile top 5, right? And so we just cancel people. You know, we cancel people, we cut them out of our lives, and then we look around and we say, I don't have anybody else. I don't have anybody to trust. And then when you get to that point, that's when you say, well, I have to do it all by myself. But you don't. You don't have to do it by yourself. God doesn't want that for you.
Absolutely. So how do we get to a place of, so those who are wrestling with mental illness or maybe dealing with the impacts of trauma, and so how do we show up for those people in our lives without depleting ourselves?
One, by setting boundaries. We have to know ourselves what we can take, what we can't take. We need to sit with ourselves, be able to meditate, be able to establish, okay, how much have I dealt with in the past week? How much have I dealt with today? Right? Where am I right now? And how can I give? How much can I give? Because sometimes we have a cup that's this big, right? And then we can, you know, have it filled all the way up to here. And so we can take a little, right? We can give a little bit and have some. But if that cup is full and we're overflowing with stuff, then we have to be able to just stop and say, you know what? I want to be able to give to you in this moment, but my plate is full. But I see that your plate is also. So I'm going to direct you in this area because they'll be able to help you a little bit better, right? Being able to direct people in a manner to where they can get the help that they need without feeling like we have to fix them, right? Because at the end of the day, what qualifies us to fix everybody, right?
Right.
When we have to do the fixing for ourselves to ourselves.
Right.
We have work that we have to do on our own, inward. And so we have to make sure that we set boundaries for ourselves. And sometimes that means weeding out some toxic people. Sometimes that means, you know, not going certain places that don't serve us anymore, or going places that's not benefiting us or bringing us any joy, not doing things that aren't bringing us joy or happiness or just fulfillment, right? You know, sometimes we get in the habit of doing all of these different things that don't move the needle forward and push us towards our purpose. Rather, we're doing all of these different things out of routine, and that's not healthy for us.
That's good. And so, and as you mentioned, out of routine. So even with setting boundaries, and so I'm actually, what I would say, pretty new with setting boundaries. The past 2 years, I've been intentional about setting boundaries. And so what about when people don't respect our boundaries, when they may consider you a bad friend or a bad person because you're not always available to be there for them? And so what would you say to that person who's like, look, I try to be there for my friends. I try to set boundaries, but they're not respected. What do? Do I cut them off completely? You know, what advice would you give to someone who's like, I'm trying to set the boundary because I don't want to become depleted, but it's not working?
Yeah. Take an honest look at what you put into that friendship as far as, you know, how much you've given. Because the thing about friendships and relationships is it's not about how long you can be friends, or it's not about how long you can be together, but it's about when you go through things, when you go through trauma, when you go through disagreements, can you come back from that? And so it's important to be able to establish, you know, okay, I've given to this relationship and I've given my part. So this is a moment where I do have to be firm and be able to communicate, you know what, I wish I was able to give you what you need in this moment, but at this present time, I can't give you that. I wish I could say yes to you in this moment, but at this present time, I can't say yes to you. And so I want this relationship to move forward. But if you choose for it not to, then okay. Then I'm okay with that. And be okay with that.
You know, even as you mentioned communication, like, so for those who may be struggling with anxiety or depression, PTSD or bipolar, so many different, you know, mental health disorders or mental illnesses. And so to the person that is struggling, and they may not have communicated to those persons in their lives that this is what I'm struggling with. Do you think that people should articulate that, like, this is what's going on? Because as you mentioned in the beginning of the video, people can become withdrawn. And so it's not that they are intentionally becoming withdrawn, but it's a result of what they're dealing with. And so should they communicate to those in their lives that they have anxiety, PTSD, or whatever they may be struggling with?
I'm an advocate of living your truth, right? If you're struggling with something, then be able to communicate that outright. You don't have to say in great detail every single, you know, piece of the fabric, right? But if you're struggling with something, then say that, because you don't know what somebody else can pour into you. There have been many times, you know, if I'm dealing with something, I may tell a friend or tell a pastor, man, I'm struggling with this thing. And then they will be able to pour into me, you know, a piece of information that I may need to hear in that moment. You know, sometimes we can be in a place to where we let that ego hold the microphone and we won't say anything at all. And we'll just suffer silently without seeking the help that we need. But you will be surprised how often other people around us are dealing with the exact same thing that we're dealing with, but also feel the way that we do. And so I see, especially now in society, more people are opening up about the things that they're dealing with and about the trauma and about some of the anxiety and depression. And I can see us rallying together to help us. Now, that's not everybody, but just that it's a few people and it's enough people to encourage us to get the help that we need. That's powerful. And we need that. And we need to be able to work together. But it's hard and difficult for us to work together if we're silent, if we don't tell people what's going on. People aren't mind readers. They can't read our minds and, you know, be able to decipher what we're dealing with, you know. And that's why I say it's so important for us as people to, you know, be able to serve and look and listen. But that can only do so much. And so it's important for us to be open. If I'm dealing with something, then I will tell you that I'm dealing with this thing. And that way it saves future arguments later, right? If I'm struggling with something, you don't know I'm struggling with it, then we can clash later because I'm angry or upset about something that you didn't know or were aware of. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yep, it does.
And so it's important for us to be open in a way that we can feel safe, and to people that we feel safe being open with, right? Because you can't be open and safe with everybody, right? Everybody may not be out there for you, but it's important to know those that are, and for you to be able to be open with them and get the help that you need.
That's good. And so for those who are watching and those who have joined, thank you so much for joining us. And so I have a question I would love for you to participate in the chat. So which is harder for you to say, I love you, I need help, or I apologize? So if you're on the chat, could you drop it in your answer? So which is harder for you to say, I love you, I need help, or I apologize? I want to see.
It's a good question.
So, and so also look, the last option is none of the above. If you like, I can say all of those. But yeah, so which is harder for you to say, I love you, I need help, I apologize? And so what about you, RaShun? Are you D, none of the above?
No.
Ooh, I need help.
For me, it would be I apologize. And that's something that, you know, I've been working on, you know, for a little time, and I've become better at it, but it's still one of the things that takes work, right? You know, saying I apologize means that you take ownership that something was wrong. Saying that you apologize means that you take your position in a situation, right? And sometimes we're not always willing to do that. And so I think I've been doing some great work with that. But I also encourage everybody to decipher in your own life, you know, how easy or how hard is it for you to accept your place in a problem, right? Or how easy or how hard is it for you to be able to tell somebody genuinely how you feel, or be able to say whether or not you need help. Sometimes it's us being up. All of these things that you just mentioned are good, because it causes us to put our ego aside. We have to place that ego on the ground and be able to say, you know what, I need to be in a space of vulnerability to get things done right now. Me being able to say, look, I apologize, helps to solve some issues and helps to, mend some wounds that need to be mended. But not putting forth that effort to do that, keeps things real solid and real, cemented in a way that doesn't cause healing.
That's good. And so everyone in the chat, everyone in the chat said I need help. And so that is mine. And so I'm getting to a place of apologizing better or saying I love you, but I need help. I don't like that.
Yeah.
Like I'll struggle. And so the past 6 months, God has been dealing with me because I was in a position where it's like, I need help. I can't do this by myself. And so that vulnerability, I was like, I don't like this, especially when you haven't been able to articulate that before, or it was used against you. And so you become very fearful of actually saying, I need help, due to fear of something being thrown in your face. And so that is definitely a challenge for me. And as you mentioned, like you walking out your process. And so that's something I'm walking out now. Like, I'm like, ooh, God, I don't like this, but I know I can't do it by myself.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's good.
Yeah. The thing about that too is we have to make sure we understand that it doesn't make us weak to ask for help. It doesn't mean that we're less than or that we can't do something. It just means that sometimes that's the strongest thing that you can do is ask for help. And it's so powerful to be able to do that because even the strongest people in our community have had to ask for help. Martin Luther King couldn't do it alone. He asked for help, right? Nobody in our community could do it alone. They had people along the way to help them, to talk to them, to coach them, to encourage them. Right. And so we need that, and we need people in our lives to be able to help us in those ways.
Wow, that's good.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I get it.
And I never thought about the aspect of even Martin Luther King or just envisioning all of the work that he did or other civil rights activists. And it's like they couldn't have done it alone. So that's so powerful. Like, seriously.
Yeah. He made countless phone calls to people and to representatives and to just community leaders to work with him in accomplishing this thing.
So true. And so we cannot do it by ourselves. So we cannot do it by ourselves. Even
and remember,
this live, like, look, I couldn't do it by myself.
Exactly, right? So, we have to make sure that we're not being selfish towards ourselves. And that's the thing that we have to think about, because not asking for help can be us being selfish toward ourselves. And one of the selfless things that we could do is to, have other people help us and step into the conversation and step into this journey that we're walking out. Because it's lonely trying to do it by yourself.
It is. And even in ministry, one of the things that I heard when I first became a minister was that it's lonely in ministry. And I'm realizing it doesn't have to be. It's like, are you closing yourself out? Are you not surrounding yourself with the right people? Because it shouldn't be a lonely journey. As you mentioned, like, you can't do it by yourself. And so God wouldn't call you and equip you to do it by yourself. That's just not how it works.
Exactly. We're not here to work alone, live alone, or to love alone.
That's a fact.
One
thing I realized with Kanye West recently, I don't know if you heard about it in the news, with him in the episode. And so I believe there's a stigma as it relates to mental illness. And so many people think that mental illness has a look. And so for him, people label him as crazy, or people will say like, oh, you don't look depressed, or you're too pretty, or you're too handsome, or whatever it is. You don't look like you would be dealing with that. You got a roof over your head. You got good money, and so that stigma, which I feel like it keeps people in bondage because people are not able to actually articulate, I'm struggling because I don't fit this image of what you think it is. And so can you speak to like what high functioning depression or anxiety looks like? Because so many people think it's just locking yourself in a room. So many people say anxiety is bad nerves, and so what does that high functioning anxiety or depression or bipolar disorder look like? Because mental illness doesn't have a face,
Yeah. So somebody with high functioning anxiety, you would see them before a speech or before a meeting, getting nervous, twiddling with their fingers. You can identify somebody with some anxiety issues who bite their nails a lot. You'll see that their nails will be all the way down to the meat, and
Yeah.
so you can see that there. You can see people, you know, who struggle with depression, who are high functioning, who may disappear for a little while. You may not see them, or they may not be able to accept a compliment well. But these are just high functioning things, right? But it doesn't mean that, they shouldn't get any help, or that doesn't mean that, they have everything put together. And sometimes when we see people like Kanye, some people shun him, but what really is happening was what I think is we're disappointed. And we're disappointed because we see that he has all this money and all this wealth and that he's still struggling. Because we think that once you get to a certain place and once you get to a certain stature, you shouldn't have to deal with these same issues. In our own lives, we say, well, if I could just do this, then things will be all right. Or if I could just do this, then things will work out. Or things would be better if I could just have this, right? But reality is there will be challenges at every stage of your life, no matter how much money you have. There was a scientist, well, not a scientist, but there was a study done that says about $75,000 is where happiness can buy. But beyond that, you're not going to get any more happier than you were if you had $75,000 in your pocket. So it doesn't matter if you're a millionaire, billionaire, you're not going to be any happier because that curve just goes like that. You can get happy, but then the more money you have, it just goes straight. And so you will still encounter problems no matter how much money you have.
That's real. And even I think the way people view artists, or like you said, people who reach a certain stature, it's like it's this invincibility that is like, oh, like you said, they're still struggling. What's going on?
Yeah.
And so even as it relates to like high functioning anxiety, that's something that I struggled with before. Still working out my journey. And so that high functioning anxiety can present itself as workaholism. And so in this culture of grinding, it's like, oh, we are applauding this person who seems to have this amazing work ethic, but they're really struggling. They don't know how to stop. They don't know how to sit still. And so their mind is racing all the time. And so many times it's like they even become, you can become depleted by being on autopilot and just going and going and going and going. Like it's not healthy. Yeah. And so when we see,
when Steve Harvey was talking about not sleeping, right? If you want to make it, you shouldn't be able to sleep. That's anxiety to me, right? If a person's not sleeping, they're constantly running, they're constantly thinking, they're constantly, dealing with these things. That's anxiety, right? You're not being able to sit still. You're not being able to find a place of peace, a place of meditation to where you can be comfortable. Things are constantly moving. If you constantly feel like you haven't made it, then that's anxiety.
Yep, and that's good because, Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah. And so, when I look at people like that, or when I look at Kanye, I'm concerned about, and I'm thinking about who's around him that's helping him or who's enabling him, because sometimes we have those same people in our circles that are enabling us, that are pushing us to do these things without looking and saying, okay, this person's not who he usually is. Right. So they're not encouraging us to take a step back and to, get on the medication or to get the counseling or to get the help and just pull back from all the work. They're pushing us to keep going, keep going, keep going. Now, realizing everybody has a limit. Right. And, I look at Kanye and I can see him. I know he's working. He works extremely hard to do a lot of the things that he's doing. But if everybody around him is pushing him and pushing him and pushing him, doesn't matter how much medication you're on, eventually you reach the threshold above what that medication can do for you. Your medication is only going to meet you at a certain level. But once your stress reaches above that level where your medication is, then you need help. Then you have to take a step back. Then you have to reevaluate what you're dealing with and how much is in your cup, because your cup is full.
Yeah, that's good. Even just thinking about Kanye, I think just seeing him have his episode, or if that's the correct terminology for it, but, to see him cry, to see the highs and the lows of bipolar disorder just pretty much play out in the clip that was shown of him. And so it was just like, this is what it may look like for him. And so how does bipolar disorder show up, for others? And so how may we be able to spot what bipolar disorder may look like in our friends or in ourselves? Because we may be the one that's struggling with something that's undiagnosed as well.
Yeah. So what a lot of people think about bipolar disorder is just mood swings that, sometimes I'm happy and sometimes I get angry, right? And that's just only a small piece of it. And when we talk about manic episodes, we're talking about people who may go on a spending spree and spend all of their money. And then after they come down from that manic episode, then they reach a stage of depression because now they have nothing, right? Or we may be talking about people that, go on these binges of I have to get something done, and it not be something specific, but it be a whole different array of different things that they are trying to do with no innate direction. And they won't sit down to get that thing done, or they won't sit down to take a break. They just keep moving. And so, I've worked with different people who have struggled with bipolar disorder. And, sometimes the manic episodes don't happen, as often as we think they do. Sometimes people say, well, today my bipolar is acting up. I mean, that's not always true, because for many people with bipolar, their manic episodes may be once every other month or once a year, or, so it's spread out sometimes. You will have an episode here, and then you will have an episode of depression or an episode of just being anxious. And sometimes it's where we're trying to do a whole bunch of different things and just not able to settle down. And so being able to recognize that in our friends when they start to have these urges where I have to get this thing done, and it's so drastic, and you're like, okay, that's kind of out of the box, and they keep pushing and they're doing it for 2-3 days at a time, right? That to me looks like a manic episode, and that'd be something that I would be aware of.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
And so, yeah, that's very eye-opening, because, again, it's typically only associated with the highs and the lows. And so even you just highlighting the shopping sprees, like, who would think that that's, a manic episode? Because, again, we just thinking about the highs and the lows of the personality.
Yeah.
So,
impulsive
that's good.
behavior.
Impulsive behavior. And so, yeah, that is good. And so, look, I was taking notes as you were talking, because I'm like, wow. The spending spree, because I'm like, in our communities, I do believe that we disguise some of the things that we're going through or struggling with, because it's like, let me go shopping. And as you mentioned, then it leads to the depression, because it's like, now I'm broke. I don't have the finances anymore because I spent all this money, and also overeating, something else that is in our community, which leads to that obesity, and then which is also linked to disease. So, the high blood pressure, diabetes, because these are all connected to that undiagnosed mental illness that may be lying dormant.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. Sometimes we have to recognize the positions that we're putting ourselves in, and what that does for us. I was reading Dr. Rita Walker's, her book, The Unapologetic Guide to Black Mental Health. And one of the things that it discusses in that book is how sometimes, in so many words, we could be committing suicide based off of not taking care of ourselves, purposely not eating right after the doctor and our family member and everybody else told us, look, if you keep eating this way, this is what's going to happen. And we're just like, well, it's my life, X, Y, and Z. That's where you're going. Or especially for Black men in the community, in the streets, that are purposely putting themselves in positions to where they don't care what happens to them. That if you antagonize this person that has a gun, that he could possibly shoot you, but you're in a place where you don't care about your own life. What does that say? And so we have to be conscious of that. We have to be, vigilant of ourselves and of the people around us, and the way that they think about life, the way they think about themselves, and how we think about life and ourselves.
And that's good. The suicide, the low-key suicide. I have that book as well, and it is amazing. Because even speaking to that, it's like suicide isn't just someone ending their life with a weapon or something like that. As you mentioned, the overeating, the doctor already said that, you should make changes, but you're not making these changes. And so that is good. And that speaks to the Black community completely. And so even as we relate to the Black community in therapy. And so, as you mentioned earlier, like, we've come a long way. So the generations now are progressing. They're speaking more about mental health and mental illness. They're coming out there, sharing their stories. And so what are some of the myths that you see about therapy or that you hear about?
One of the myths is that my problems aren't serious enough for therapy. You know, and that's been a myth that's been going on for a long time. Well, you have to be crazy to go to therapy, or you must be at the end of your rope to go to therapy. And that's not always true. Therapy is for the people that, need help coping with stress, need help coping with things on their job, or just need some direction. Therapy is for people that even just need a listening ear, may not feel like they have anybody in their life to be able to brainstorm with. I can't tell you how many sessions that we're just brainstorming different ways to do things, different ideas to help them to get to the next step, right? That happens so often. Therapy is not just, for the extreme, but it's often for the minute as well. Because just like you go to your doctor, you don't always just go to your doctor or you shouldn't always just go to your doctor when your arm's broke, right? But you should also go to your doctor for a checkup. And the same thing for your mental health. Don't just go when something's, dramatically wrong, but also go when you feel like, okay, maybe I could use a little checkup. Maybe I could use a little tune-up, right? Because we're all vehicles here. We're vessels, And so if your check engine light comes on, it's important for you to go get that fixed to see what's wrong. But if you go through life with anger issues, with depression, with anxiety, with PTSD, with all of these different things, and your check engine light is on, but you don't go get it checked up, then eventually you're going to be on the side of the road and somebody's going to have to come and get you. And so you want to be able to get the healing that you need, or get the help, or get the advice and the coping skills and the tools that you need to get your vessel fixed, to get your vehicle fixed in a way to where it can produce some longevity in your life. So it's not just when things are traumatically wrong, but sometimes when there's some little red flags here and there, that's when you go. Not when it's terrible, but when they're warning signs.
That's good. And even speaking to therapy, a lot of people may struggle. They may think, someone can't relate to me, or I don't like telling people my business. And so how would you encourage someone to just kind of be comfortable with finding someone that's best for them?
Yeah. They say 70 to 80% of what works in therapy is the rapport. And so when you meet a therapist, it's important to work towards building a good rapport with that therapist. It's not, one of the things that you go in to get something and just go back out, but it's a relationship that you build with. And so, of course, you don't have to, as soon as you walk in that door, spill all of your guts and then say, okay, now fix me, but it's a relationship that you build with that person. And so it takes you being vulnerable, you being open, and you being able to put that ego down and get to a space to where you say, okay, I need help. This is a professional that has worked and is experienced enough to help me. So let me see if we can build the rapport to get that done.
That's good. And even something else that I thought about as it relates to therapy, a lot of people may have this preconceived notion that therapy, you'll leave out of your session and you'll feel amazing. And so that may not be the case all the time. And so, in my own personal experiences, there were times when I left therapy feeling heavier because there was work to be done. And so therapy literally put a mirror up, at times like, okay, I didn't want to see that. I didn't know that was there. And so how would you encourage someone who may find themselves in this spot where they're like, they stopped going to therapy because they like too much? How would you encourage that person to pick back up?
It's sometimes like when you go to the mechanic shop because you think that click is something specific and you have in your mind what you think that click is. And then you go and that mechanic says, nah, that click is this, and this. And you're going to need to fix and work on these different things for your car to sound the way that you want it to sound. And sometimes, yes, coming out of that session, you can feel a lot heavier because you didn't know going in that you needed to deal and work with those things. So I encourage people to go in with an open mind, understanding that, you know what, this is a professional that may reveal some things about me that I didn't know about myself, because that's innately what you want to happen. You don't want to go in knowing the same thing that you knew when you went in the first time. You want to go in
Right.
and come out knowing something different, or being able to have some new revelation about yourself, you know, that you can use and work on, right? So
Mhm.
you want to grab some tools when you come out.
That's good. Grab some tools, put it in the
Hmm.
toolbox.
Yeah.
And so, even as it relates to our various relationships, and so how do we maintain those relationships while doing the work with ourselves?
Hmm.
Just how do you believe that we're able to maintain all of those dynamics? Even though I know you mentioned earlier setting boundaries. And so
Hmm.
a lot of people, just to segue really quick, so a lot of people may struggle to set boundaries with certain people in their lives. And so you may have someone in the friendship category who's an acquaintance, or someone who's supposed to just be a coworker. And so can you speak to the importance of setting those boundaries in different relationships so that we're not depleted, or we're not having this expectation that a person cannot, be there for us to the degree that we desire, so because we have them out of place. So does that make
Hmm.
sense? Did I just talk?
Yeah.
I asked you like 4 questions. Okay.
Yeah. We'll work it out. So one of the things is, you know, it's so important for us to sit and to self-reflect, you know, and be able to ask ourselves, you know, the people in our lives that we have, what purpose are they serving? Because not everybody in your life is serving the purpose that they need to serve in your life. Everybody's not serving you. And some people are in your life that are just taking up space and maybe an anchor for you, maybe holding you down. And so it's important to reflect on what benefit they're serving in your life. And if they're not serving at all, then it may be important for you to have that conversation with them and be able to say, you know what, this is a relationship that, you know, we can dismantle, or this is something that, you know, I would just like to be acquaintances with, and that's fine. Sometimes you don't even have to have that conversation. You can go forward with it, you know, with that understanding. But it's important for you to
Right.
know for yourself who's serving you and who's not, and not serving you as in, you know, serving you meals, but who's
Right.
doing you some good and who's not, who's helping you along your journey, who's there for you and supporting you along your journey, and who's not. Because sometimes we can keep moving, and they're toxic people holding us down and anchoring us to a stage of life that uh, we're growing past.
Mm.
So we have to take some time to self-reflect. We have to take some time to decide and decipher, you know, who's doing some good in my life and helping to move the needle and supporting me, and then who's doing the opposite of that.
Mhm. So that's good, because that self-awareness, just being
Hmm.
able to identify ourselves and the relationships in our lives, being able to decipher between all of those. And so even
Yeah.
on this journey towards healing, it's like if you really truly want to become better, you have to look in the mirror and point out where do I play a part in this? Do I
Hmm.
have any behaviors that are toxic?
True.
What is it inside of me? Because sometimes with some failed relationships, it's like, okay, who's the common denominator here? And sometimes it's us. What
Hmm.
do we do when it's us?
Yeah.
Again, becoming self-aware, like,
Hmm.
because if we admit, sometimes we weren't always healthy for others as well. Like, we all
Yeah.
had those things you spoke to in the beginning of the video. We all have some stuff that we're dealing with. And so
Exactly.
even when we
Sometimes we
are
are the toxic
uncomfortable,
person.
exactly. And
Yeah.
so we can't expect people to just stick it out with us and be
Hmm.
subject to our toxicness. I don't even know if that's a word, but toxicness, I'm using it today. So if we want people to be exposed to that, it's like, no, people shouldn't have to be exposed to that. Like, no, you
Hmm.
don't have to. I'm trying to word this. I don't want to say this. So people don't have to be subject to you if you have unhealthy
Yeah.
behavior. So
Yeah. And
yeah.
the thing I understand too is, you know, everybody's not telling the same lie, right? That's one of the old things that, you know, been said often. Everybody's not telling the same lie. Sometimes we will go through life with these behaviors, and we will miss out on this relationship here, or this person here will cut us off and just go about their life, you know, telling us that we're always angry. And like, no, I'm not always angry. You just and we start to put it off on other people without owning,
Right.
ourself, our toxicity. And so it's important, again, like I said, for us to, seek some help, get some counseling, get some therapy, or, figure out what we need for ourselves, to move the needle away from that toxic behavior that we have, because we are toxic sometimes. I mean, we can't sit
Right.
here and say that, we've never been toxic or that we won't ever be toxic because we don't know. I had a, revelation probably about a year or two ago where I said, at any given moment in time, we always have the opportunity to be the villain in somebody's life, no matter how good our intentions are. Sometimes you can
Right.
have the best intentions, but that person may take offense to it, or that person may see you doing it in a way that may not be good for them. And so they may shift the narrative of what you see as something being good. And so it's important for us to understand that we have to look at ourselves and be able to own up to what we're doing in this moment and be able to
Exactly.
take responsibility for our part in situations, because it's not always about us. It's not always about,
Exactly.
what they did to us. Sometimes we have to own up to what we do, and being able to
Absolutely.
apologize, being able to ask for help, and being able to say, you know what, I love you enough to work on this relationship and to work on myself.
That's good. To
Mm-hmm.
work on this relationship and myself. And so the myself part is major because it's like relationships can't work if we're not doing the work for ourselves as well.
Exactly.
Like we
Exactly.
have to both be doing the work.
Mm-hmm.
So it
Yeah.
is 7:51. Does anyone have any questions for RaShun? Let's see. But while we're waiting, and so is there anything you want to leave us with, or do you have any statements or nuggets you want to drop in our spirit? You've been drinking, you've been dropping nuggets all night. You got any more nuggets tucked away?
Um, you know, I just want people to continue to look inward and to figure out how we can have a more compassionate and a more servant spirit. Because when we love people with a servant spirit and when they love us back with a servant spirit, we can have happier relationships. We can have longer lasting relationships. When we get out of ourselves sometimes and be willing to listen compassionately to other people, and direct them and help them in the ways that they need to, but also for ourselves, be willing to be vulnerable and have people listen to us and help us, getting the counseling that we need to get, just being in a space to where we're willing to move to a place of healing rather than just staying comfortable because this, traumatic place or this thing that I'm struggling with feels familiar. So many people do that. They just sit in one spot, not moving, not going forward, not going backward, but just staying here because it's comfortable and it's familiar, you know. And because just because progress, just because of growth, you may go through some growing pains. It doesn't mean that it's going to be the same pain. It's going to be a worse pain than what you're currently dealing with right now or what you've dealt with in the past.
Growing pains. That's good.
Yeah.
And so how can we find you if someone is looking for a Black male therapist? How can they find you? What are your social media handles, your website? How can they
Well,
contact you?
my website is www.faithtalkcounseling.com, and you can also find me on Instagram at Faith Talk Counseling. And so if anybody needs counseling, especially here in Texas, especially in this Houston area, or just in Texas period, because I do teletherapy as well, then they can find me by going to my website, www.faithtalkcounseling.com, and just go into the contact page and writing me a little message, leaving their information, and I'll get right back with you, and we'll get it started.
Perfect. Like, thank you so much for saying yes, RaShun. I really appreciate you. Congratulations on your second child. And so, again, thank you so much for this. So much insight. Look, I have a notebook full of notes. You can't feel my ring light, but look, check me, it's full of notes. Just to reflect on so many different things that you said. And so just to kind of highlight some things that really stood out to me, just how bipolar disorder, the manic episode, it may be a shopping spree. And so to be intentional about paying attention to ourselves and those persons who are in our lives, and also to be self-aware, to identify when we are the toxic one, and to be able to point those behaviors out in ourselves. And also that suicide is not always in the ideal that we, or the framework that we see it in. And so it may be the bad eating habits. It may be not making health changes, or whatever it may have been that your primary care physician said. And also, our bodies are vehicles, we are vessels. And so make sure that you are taking care of yourself, doing the work necessary, because you don't want to wait for that check engine light to come on, as RaShun mentioned. Don't wait for it to come on, because then it's like, okay. But definitely make the investment. Therapy is hard, it's difficult, it's challenging, but it's a process that is worth it. And so you'll see the changes in yourself over time. And so thank you so much for the comments. I enjoyed the session. Okay, perfect. Okay. But yeah, so again, thank you so much. This was very insightful. So anyone, if you have any questions, no problem. And so anyone, if you have any questions, just make sure you drop it. You can drop it here. Well, this live is going to cut off in a minute. And so if you have any questions, please feel free to send me a message, send RaShun a message. I will be sure to reach out to you. And make sure y'all go follow him. If you're not already, please follow his page. Show him some love. He's a Black male therapist, something that is sacred in this world. And so we definitely appreciate the work that you do.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Good night, y'all.
All right. Good night.
Good night.